Good afternoon. This is Media Center, Ukraine, Odessa. Thank you for watching us, and we are happy to welcome in Odessa Tamila Tasheva, permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And we also have two experts today, Hanna Shelest, Director of Security Programs at the Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism, PhD in Policies, and Borys Kormych, Head of the Department of Maritime and Customs Law at the Odesa Law Academy, National University, Editor-in-Chief of the Lex Portus magazine. Tamila, the floor is yours. A few words about future integration of Crimea with the focus on Odessa. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure that I will be able to share views on Odessa focus. I think that my colleagues will be able to do this, and I'm happy to be here. And this is the first time after the full-scale invasion started that I visit Odessa, and I love the city a lot. And before 2014 and after 2014, after the occupation started, I gladly visited Odessa because it is very close now to the Crimean Peninsula. We have common Black Sea. And of course, the security of the Black Sea and Azov is very important, and Hanna can share more details about this. As for reintegration policies that are being developed now, should cover all the occupied territories. So we are trying to develop common approach, although we understand that those regions who have been occupied for more than 9 years now have their own specifics, especially when it comes to the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, because there is a special status of those territory, and there are also 3 indigenous peoples residing there. Following the order of the President Zelensky, we have been developing a range of strategic decisions. We understand that the occupation is possible, first of all, thanks to the armed forces of Ukraine, and also thanks to our diplomatic efforts. But we should work now on reintegration and not waiting for liberation of the territories. So the first issue, this is the resumption of the activities of public authorities during the martial law and the gradual transition to civil activities. We have worked on the issue of the recovery register, including jobs, and the pilot project has already started. In May, the Cabinet of Ministers approved the decree, and we can announce this now because starting from the Monday, basing on the National Agency of the Public Services, the project will start for those people who want to become a part of this register, to travel then to the occupied territories, to undergo training, to be able to recover those territories, because we will need a lot of jobs and a lot of peoples. And we have calculated for Crimea alone, at least 50,000 people will be required for Crimea, including law enforcement authorities, because we understand that those people who work on the occupied territory cannot be the part of the resumpted Ukrainian law enforcement system on the peninsula. And this is like the question of judges, and all of us know the challenges of the judge system, even on the government-controlled part territory. This also covers such jobs like teachers, healthcare workers, etc. So we should work with this. And also to announce vacancies, we need to work with people, we need to train them accordingly. And we have already launched the online course dedicated to Crimea for the advanced training of the public servants on the base under umbrella of the National Shevchenko University. We are going to launch since autumn two master programs, offline, online. The second set of issues, of course, related to responsibility, people being liable for being collaborators, because this is what the society expects from us. But we should balance everything, probably taking into consideration the international standards, human rights, and not to prosecute people unjustified. We need to bring to liability those people who were involved in imposing occupation regime, those betrayals. Of course, we should speak about the military component here. And the Ukrainian legislation already has the specific norms to bring these people to liability. But we believe that the framework is too wide. We believe that it should be narrowed, and to have two types of liability, like criminal liability or lustration, which is not criminal liability, but this is the possibility to meet the need for justice, the demand for justice from the societies. Those people who did not occupy some managerial positions but kept working in the occupiers' bodies cannot be brought to criminal liability, but they should not be able to get jobs in Ukrainian bodies. Another big set of issues related to the property, and citizens, Ukrainian citizens, keep asking us about that. These are the verification of the documents that have been issued on the occupied territories, millions of the documents. Of course, according to the Ukrainian legislation, we do not recognize these documents, including decisions, the judicial decisions, but to avoid the collapse of the system, we will need to work with this. And this is a big set of issues that we have been working on. Of course, a significant lump here is humanitarian policy, so-called cognitive deoccupation. This is like work with minds. And as our colleague from the Ministry of Defense has mentioned, so there should be cognitive demining, because Russians put a lot of mines in the minds of our people, and this is also includes militarization of minds of our children. Of course, we need to manage all this somehow. We need to resume work of free Ukrainian mass media. We should also introduce their all standards of Ukrainian education. And one more issue which is important for our audience, what we will do to colonize those people who illegally arrive to the peninsula. They are actually involved in the criminal activities, or they are the citizens of Russians. Some people, experts say that this is up to 700,000 people who have arrived there. They should be taken out of those territory according to the Ukrainian legislation. But I think that even without expulsion, a lot of them will leave those territory. And there is one more set of issues. This is the economic recovery of Crimea. There are to say hyperlinks here with the region of the southern region of our state. In general, this is Mykolaiv and Mykolaiv Oblast, Odesa Oblast, and Kherson and the Kherson Oblast. And Crimea is seen as yet another infrastructure sea hub like Odessa. And of course, we will not be able to demilitarize Crimea when it comes to Ukrainian armed forces, because we need to strengthen our military positions there, because Russia in the nearest future will be there close to the region. That's how we need to somehow combine civilian and military component according the standards and best practices of different countries, including the United States. Of course, we should develop tourism and resort areas in Crimea, but until the security situation is stable, it will be impossible. We have developed all these visions that will be presented this year at the Crimean Platform Summit, which will be the third one. And we hope for active involvement of our colleagues from the civil society, from the expert circles. We've planned the summit for the 23rd of August, and in October we also planned to have the parliamentary summit, and we would like to present all this information about reintegration processes. Thank you for your attention, and I happily answer your questions. Thank you. Now I would like to give floor to Hanna Shelest. How could it affect Odessa and the southern region of Ukraine when it comes to the occupation of Crimea? I think we should not talk about Odessa separately, because the occupation of Crimea is the all-Ukrainian issue, and if Odessa considers itself as a part of Ukraine, then this means that we should have the binational approach, because when we have the national consensus on the issue, then it will be easier to make decisions on reintegration, not only with regard to Crimea, but to the all this now could be a bridge and could be actively involved in the process of. This also covers the military issue, and Odessa became again a sea military base because of the part of the fleet was brought to Odessa. When it comes to resumption of the military bases in Crimea, or full demilitarization of Crimea, because this issue has not been settled in full, it could be the part of negotiations, and then of course Odessa will be actively involved in this, because this basis that we have now is also our this is a question that is related to Odessa. The renewal of the activities of ports. Of course, Zhytomyr and Lviv cannot help here as Odessa can do. So we could discuss this with universities and the companies involved in this area. When it comes to agriculture, and we could consider the full conglomerate of the whole northern part of the Black Sea. When it comes to the safety and security of the Black Sea, when it comes to Istanbul Convention, the environmental issues, everything will be related to the whole south of Ukraine. And if you want to develop a long-term state strategy, we cannot talk about Crimea separately, because Crimea will be the part of the Black Sea and Azov regions. This will be a big, large conglomerate. On the other hand, we should honestly say that there are some specific issues which share these imperialistic colonist ideas that were related to this or that extent to both regions. When we can feel the pain of Crimea, because a lot of historical pages related to Crimea and Odessa, as well as understanding that the south of Ukraine, including Odessa and Crimea, has also Ukrainian roots, because very often we mentioned the ancient Greece, which was here, the Russian Empire, and also the Russia-Turkish wars. But somehow, then abruptly, we start talking about Soviet times. And Crimea is partially more lucky than Odessa, because we could bring to the public discussion the Crimean Tatar identity. But now we are going to face one more issue that we will need to discuss together with the Odessa region, the Kherson region, and Crimea. This is the Ukrainian identity of these territories. What was the Ukrainian history, etc.? We're not talking about the ethnic identity now. We're talking about the wider context, context, historical and the modern history of what happened over the last 30 years. We will need support. We will have common challenges and the common vision for the strategy, how we will just build upon the safety situation, security in the Black Sea, including the fleet, bases, and we also should discuss the environmental issues and how to turn this area to the tourist resort, because of the militarization of Crimea, the tourism is not in Crimea as it was a decade ago, how we can support Crimea with this. And of course, general conclusions, this is not to exclude Odessa from the general context, just to see where we can support with our own expertise and where our understanding of historical pain can help us support Crimea. And we should also remember that 1 year of occupation, of war, requires in the best scenario 2 years of the recovery and renewal. So we're not talking now about 1 year, we're talking about many years of future work. Thank you. Borys. It is very difficult to be the last speaker, but now it's your turn. What do you think about the occupation of Crimea? Should we just separate Odessa from Crimea or not? Not from Crimea, but from the whole of the south when it comes to parallels between Odessa and Crimea? Thank you. I could make a small example, like economy. The Black Sea unites Crimea, Odessa, and the whole Black Sea coast of Ukraine. And here we need to understand one simple thing. It won't work as it was before the war, because the supply chains have been changed 3 times. First, when we lost Crimean ports, business just adjusted to that. Then the period from 2014 to 2021, when gradually Russia tried to somehow suffocate our ports into the Azov Sea, and our business adjusted once again. And the latest adjustment happened or started after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. So we cannot just state, let's recover. Because some businesses have already found the new supply chains through the ports of Germany, Polish, through the western bed. Some of the goods could be returned here, like grain, metal, because the Black Sea is the only economically feasible route, because all the solidarity lanes through Europe are generating new losses. So we need to understand, when Ukraine returns Crimea, we will see that a lot of will be destroyed, their mined or stolen. And this, when it comes to the Ukrainian sea business, it is great to have some general vision of the maritime industry of Ukraine, because we need to resume work of some ports, and we also need to see other formats, because I think a lot of people have visited Barcelona, and people saw what they made with their ports, the technical parts, some attraction places, etc. But we, of course, need to have expertise of the sea business. And what was the reason of the development of the Black Sea navigation? Because all the contracts were concluded through Moscow, through Roskomflot, and somehow the good flows disappeared. That's why it is very important to learn the opinion of people who can bring here container lines and who can manage dozens of vessels. And it is very important for the Ministry of Infrastructure to involve the business in this process, to have the general vision of the development of the Black Sea ports. Borys just mentioned the experience, for example, of Kherson, and now you're talking about different processes of the occupation, lustration, etc. Now, when it comes to the occupation, first of all, of Kherson, Izum, the Kharkiv Oblast, can you see now already some steps that should be also taken in Crimea and other occupied territories? Of course, especially when it comes to the safety and security component, we have learned the experience of all the occupied regions and territories. It should be also noted that we did not focus in detail on the security component because this is the issue in the area of responsibility of the Ministry of Defense. Of course, we cooperate here with the law enforcement bodies and the Ministry of Interior of Ukraine. They have a separate plan, which is sensitive, so it has not been openly published, contrary to our activities, because we have opened our documents to show the vision of Ukraine on reintegration of Crimea. There is a huge demand of our partners, but there are some parts of the documents that cannot be disclosed because they include the security component. But if you allow, I would like to respond to what has been mentioned by Borys. Yesterday in Kiev, we had a meeting with the representatives of Arabian diasporas. And for us, it was very interesting to learn their experience of their economic operators and businesses, and yes, they said that they large land plots, and there was expropriation because they were told to register these lands according to Russian legislation, and or they would lose their business. And the answer from our Arabian friends was glory to Ukraine, and they lost their business. And there was a lot of Arabian businesses in Crimea, including through the port infrastructure. So for them, a key gateway, a key trade route was through Crimea. And when now we say that Crimea is a part of a global South because of its culture, which is rather approximated to Eastern culture, also the religion, that the historically inherent to Crimea, which is Islamic religion, and this is the possibility to communicate with the countries of the global South. These are Arabian countries and Asian countries, Latin America, etc. Then, of course, we are trying to include the topic of Crimea and all these communications. That's why I can fully agree with Borys' words. And yesterday, we received the confirmation from just ordinary businessmen. And we also have our support of the representatives of Arabian diaspora as businessmen that after the situation is stabilized, after our victory, they are interested in restoration of the roots and of the communication. And also they want their facilities to be back. Yes, so this is the part of our concept. Everything which was illegally taken should be brought to their owners, like Massandra, Koktebel, wineries, etc., because we cannot recognize the legal decisions of the occupied administration. The floor to the journalists. Irina, the floor is yours. When we have the vision of future, this is great, but we have our difficult reality with the combat, with the hostilities, which is still ongoing. There is a legal war, which is not that vivid as hostilities, but it is still very important. And if you allow, I would like to have two questions, both to Ms. Tasheva and Mr. Kormych. The question to Ms. Tasheva. Hopefully, in 6 months, we will have the decision of the International Court of the UN, which is the supreme legal body. And the decision with regard to race discrimination, how it could change the life of Crimean Tatars in the now occupied Crimea. And the question to Borys, we understand that the Black Sea is unique from the legal point of view because no state has a full jurisdiction in the Black Sea, and and we should speak about free navigation in the Black Sea, which we don't have now because of the Russian Federation. What Ukraine can do now to be prepared to the occupation of Crimea from the legal point of view? What should be done with this regard? Thank you very much for the question. If you would just monitor the process, which is quite long, and we hope that in autumn we will have the final decision. And there was the intermediate decision of the International Court about the possibility of learning Ukrainian language in Crimea. There were actually two components with regard to terrorism in Luhansk and Donetsk, and when it comes to Crimea, that was the race discrimination. Why we decided to make avail of those two conventions, because other conventions are not signed by the Russian Federation, and there is an intermediate decision, including with regard to restoration of the Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people. Unfortunately, Majlis could not resume its activities. Instead, there was increased pressure on the Crimean Tatars, on the indigenous peoples of Ukraine, and the deputy head of the Majlis, Tamila Tasheva, was detained just as soon as the Crimean Platform Integration Summit was over. And I believe that we will have the federal decision of the International Court, because we monitored the hearings, and a couple of weeks ago, our representative of our legal unit was involved in the process, and the team of lawyers of Ukraine is very powerful, and Russia used the same tactics. According to the information from our colleagues from our delegation, all of them were put on the same bus to avoid any communication of Russians with the outer world. And there's like different situations. For example, interest movement, like the series about the chess player and how they where they were escorted and accompanied by KGB agents, and the same we see in The Hague. And of course, we are waiting for the positive decision. But could it protect now the Crimean Tatars? No, because no rulings of courts could protect Crimean Tatars now. But when it comes to the decisions of the European Human Rights Court, Rule 39 about emergency measures to protect people, this provides some protection to the imprisoned. It allows to avoid future tortures, because now some cases are more known and shown by international mass media, or it could increase the legal support of our imprisoned people. That's why all these decisions are very important for our legal war, which started in 2014. And I believe that we are quite effective in this. We document everything properly, what has been happening on the territory of Crimea and now on the territory of other occupied territories of Ukraine, and there are thousands and thousands of crimes against Ukrainians. And this decision will be very important. It will prove once again that the Ukrainian state is right, and that there are illegal activities on behalf of the Russian Federation, but unfortunately, right now, this cannot affect Crimean Tatars. I have a question to Borys. You've mentioned that the sea business should share their vision of the ports in Crimea. I remember that after 2014, sea business of some countries kept calling the Ukrainian ports. There was a vessel from Greece, from Turkey, from the Central America. And what was the attitude of Ukrainian business to such cases? And were such cases systematic, according to your information? Thank you very much. First, I would like to answer the previous question. Oh, yes, sorry, I've forgotten about that. It is a very difficult task to fight with the country using legal means when that country does not ready to fulfill its, to meet its legal undertakings. The problem of the Crimean Tatar people somehow undervaluated, and it is only seen through the style interpretation. But the situation with the Crimean Tatars is one of the oldest imperial projects of ethnical purges, and the first acts were date back 1850. And that was damaged a lot to the local populations, because back then Crimean Tatars were like 80% of the whole population of Crimea, and at the beginning of the 20th century only 25%. And when it comes to legal means of our fight, help us to raise awareness about this case and to form the social opinion, not only in Ukraine, but in other countries. A lot of the occupation measures are related to some breaches of human rights. And we need to use such phrases as affirmative actions when we create some positive discrimination to overcome the consequences of the Russian imperial policy, because for more than 550 years now, Russia has been trying just to eliminate Crimean Tatars. As for the calls of, blocking the Kerch Strait, that was quite positive, because they received we could have back our sailors, and this is also the issue of the exclusive sea zone of Crimea, territorial waters, etc. These cases were very important during our hybrid fight from 2014-2021, and it helped us to some extent, but on the other hand, there was no clear delimitation of the exclusive economic zone between Russia and Ukraine in the Black Sea. It is we have some delimitation dating back to the Soviet time, and we have delimitation with Romania, but we have never had any delimitation of this area with Russia. We could come back to this after the war, but what are the conditions? It is very difficult to say that the Tuzla Island is under the bridge, and there will be a lot of disputes about whether this part of land is island or not. And I would like to add a few words. When it comes to wider approach to these legal issues, we should remember about sanctions that were imposed because of the violations by different vessels calling Crimea. We know the complexity of this issue, and we know how Russian Federation manipulates with the national and international legislation. We could discuss this till the evening. This is the turning off of the navigation systems. These are the issues of reporting, forged documents, calling to ports. And only now Ukraine starts discussing with our partners the possibility of sanctions and arrests. And it is the most simple way to impose sanctions against a company, but it won't give us results because the vessel can change its flag. And we should not only work with the European Union in general, but with the global south of the European Union, and not only, and there are Liberia, Sierra Leone, and this is the favorite flags of the Russian vessels. We should work with these countries as well. Moreover, quite often we work with basing on the big important conventions, and these are very important public cases, because when we win in court, we can see how we can change the formulating of other international organizations, because it was started when it was the first day of occupation, because it was like recorded in one decision, and now like tens of dozens of international organizations use this date according to the court decision. But sometimes we miss specifics. Last week I was in London and I met with the Minister of Defense of the UK. And the UK is one of the biggest sea states, and all the legal and insurance companies are there. So we discussed what we could do with Crimea, and suddenly he told the following: have you thought about the pirate law? And I was astonished because I couldn't see the direct relation. And he told that, there is quite an old law in Britain. If we recognize some vessels to be involved in pirate activities, then other vessels of His Majesty could detain this vessel in any part of the world, and the master, if I'm not mistaken, can take 1/4 of the amount of the vessel. And yes, it was a very old law. And last time we used this 5 years ago. So de facto, masters of the military ships of the United Kingdom have their personal interest in detaining such vessels. And we could discuss how we can use the Pirate Acts just to cope with the vessels calling to Crimea or stealing its territorial waters. But this is one more legal possibility that we have not thought of. And I think that there are many other legal possibilities with which we could work asymmetrically. The Montreux Convention, which limits the call of vessels and ships to the Black Sea to ensure safety of the negotiation, and Turkey impedes the process. But when the Russian Federation starting violating all these rule standards to make military supplies to Crimea, Turkey they use the dry bulk ships. Turkey does not check them, and we keep raising this issue at all official levels, saying that they have right to examine all these vessels according to the convention, and they don't want to do this, which is another topic for discussion. And this is how we try to study and scrutinize different documents to mitigate the impact. And of course, we understand that Turkey is not very likely to examine all vessels calling through Bosphorus. But if only at least one vessel is examined, and we have some proofs that they used civilian vessels to transport movement of weapons, it could decrease such voyages from Syrian ports to Crimea for at least by 10%. So there is a lot of room for improvement to use additional mechanisms. I have one more question. We have one more question. I have a question to our experts. I have a question to Hanna first. When the representative office worked on the reintegration strategy, there was such idea in the context of militarization, the militarization of Crimea, friendly militarization, to use such models as Hawaii or some other places in the world. During your speech, you mentioned that the militarization of Crimea is still the topic for discussion. How do you see this as the expert on security issues? I understand that this is a huge political part here, but what format you could see as the most favorable one for Ukraine when it comes to the current situation? And I have a question to Borys as well about the review of the vision of sea industry. You've mentioned that business circles shall be involved in the process, and that it is impossible to return to the state that we have before the occupation. How do you see the role, the potential role of Crimea after the liberation of Crimea, after the occupation, in the sea routes? Before the occupation, Crimean ports were used to some extent, but did we use it to its full capacity in the context of the Black Sea, the Mediterranean Sea? So how Ukraine should reconsider the Crimea's role when it comes to sea trade routes? I could start with the militarization or demilitarization. At the moment, this is a huge puzzle or big metrics that can have a lot of options. And no one can say about some maximum or minimum, like full demilitarization, or on the contrary, to make a tower out of Crimea, but Ukrainian one. I believe that both options are unreal, but then we should answer three main questions. The first one, this is feasibility. What Ukraine needs to ensure its security? If over the last 9 years we have developing the military base on the entry to Crimea, not in the Crimea, then our military could say that theoretically bases in Berdyansk, Kochakov, Odessa are more than enough, and that we need just to unite them in one complex. And we do not need a military sea base in Crimea, or on the contrary, because of the weather conditions or some other conditions, we need to have only one military base, only in Sevastopol. But we need to restore the activities of all the other bases in Crimea and on the whole of the Ukraine. So the second question, should we restore activities of our different types of units there? Because this could be, of course, the air defense is very important in Ukraine, but this is defense. This is not an offensive. Or we can use the state bodyguard service to protect the coastline, because in Georgia, after all their vessels were destroyed, only in paper they have some military vessels, but this is the bodyguard service of Georgia that uses that ships like islands. Perhaps that would be enough for Crimea. And of course, this is the military that should respond to these first sets of questions. And any type of demilitarization, including of Russian, this could not take place in 2 days. This is not how they fled from Kherson, and these were not like only Ukrainian military bases that became Russian, and they will want to return them. For the last 30 years, it was owned by Russia, because every year that was a diplomatic scandal when we wanted to have our revision scrutiny. There are a great amount of geographical constructions and facilities there. So this is the question of years and even physically, it will take time to take all the Russian components, elements from there. What actually will be happening when they will be leaving Crimea and we will be trying to enter Crimea? The question is do we equipped enough to restore all the military bases in Crimea? Because we understand our situation after 2014 and what is the current situation, because still we have not received new ships. So this is a big question. And as for Crimea, perhaps for the economic development for the future, Crimea decides that it's need only several defense structures, but no military bases are required. And this question should be discussed, but not generally from the political point of view, but with the specific examples to understand the feasibility of differing operators and enterprises there. As for Hawaii with limited statuses, this can also be discussed, but we should understand that in the most cases, such limitations led to some historical situations and some historical agreements and feasibility. And for Ukraine, it is very important to understand how are we going to enter this war, and what will be the situation in Crimea, and what will be our historical situation at that moment, which is what will be better for us. And theoretically, when it comes to demilitarization of Crimea, this is not the militarization of the whole of Ukraine. We are talking about on the one part of Ukraine, which is 1/25. And even if we don't have military bases there, it doesn't mean that Ukraine is not protected, because somehow we managed this till 2022. When it comes to militarization, demilitarization, we should already start a serious dialogue. Perhaps it should be a closed dialogue behind the closed door, because there is a lot of sensitive information here. But before the full-scale invasion, and every year, once per month, military attaché, experts, they got together to discuss the strategy. And in strategy, the Crimea is acknowledged, recognized, but in the strategy till 2025, it is developed without Crimean facilities. So now we should again discuss everything. But now the situation is more complex, because we should discuss separately a military component, a social and economic component, and then we should try to somehow unite these to find a compromise of both parties, but we should here establish a communication between both parties, because I think that we could see daredevils from both sides saying that we need to militarize everything, but these discussions will be for the next election campaign, and this could be any political campaign, because this will be a great motto to say that we can return Ukraine military forces there. But there will be the other parties saying that all the problems of Crimea were because of the military component, that we should make kind of a tropical paradise there, and just for Russia not to be there in the future. We need to discuss different topics. If you allow, I would like to add just a few words to what has been mentioned by Anna. And now we are there is the work of different committees to change the sea doctrine. And it is clear that after the full-scale invasion, of course, we need to reconsider this. And that's why I fully support that it should be discussed. It should be a close discussion, like the committee hearings. And of course, we need to reconsider all the things that were developed back in 2017, 2018. And Boris, the floor is yours, and we will wrap up. we should start from the fact that for the last 9 years, Russia fully exported Crimea and its economic model. And to the simple example, before 2014, 35% of employees in Crimea worked in the SMEs or the individual businessmen. Now this number has decreased till 15%. In the Ukrainian economy, the part of the state is no more than 10%. In Russia, according to different assessments, it is from 70 to 80%. That's why the development of the Crimean infrastructure is related to how Ukraine will be able to bring back some normal economic model in Crimea. The second issue, what will be with Ukraine? Will we be a part of the UA or will we be a part of NATO? And if we are part of NATO, NATO could make a decision that there should be a military base in Crimea, and a part of Crimean economy will serve for the interests of that base. Or we could become the EU, a member of the EU member state, and the transport corridor will be through Crimea. And what will be with the Chinese Silk Road? So it could be also the part of the component. So there is a lot of unknown elements here. And first of all, we should discuss it with those businessmen who will have their business in Crimea. They should formulate their needs, their expectations, and Ukraine should make some step forward to involve investments to develop infrastructural projects. Thank you. Thank you very much for your briefing. Thank you for having time to visit us today during your visit to Odessa. I would like to thank experts for joining our discussions. Thank you for answering questions. And we would like to call the journalists to write more about Crimea, its occupation, and the reintegration strategy for the Autonomous Republic. After our victory, we will gladly help you with contacts of the guests of our today's press conference. Please stay tuned. See you next week.